And so our final panel of the day will transition, and I'll introduce the panelists up. I'm actually going to, they're going to let me moderate a panel today, so they don't know what they're in for. But we are very fortunate not only to have the guests that we just had, but we're going to end with a little bit of a local flavor. So first I'd like to bring to the stage from HBM Holdings, President and CEO, and also the General Chairman of the recently completed 100th PGA Championship at Bellerive Country Club, Mr. Mike DeCola. Right down
Far end? Okay.
And next, the Senior VP, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, Senior VP of Marketing and Sales for our St. Louis Cardinals, who are going to beat the Dodgers tonight, Mr. Dan Farrell.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you.
And the Chief Revenue Officer of our St. Louis Blues, Chappie, Steve Chapman.
Thank you. I've reached Sting status. I'm Chappie now.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being a part of this last discussion. So, first of all, I've got to point out, I did this for Mike. Now, he dressed for me today. I didn't wear red last night, but I was rooting for you guys. I bleed blue, but how can we talk about the PGA? So I just want to make it very clear that I made this purchase strictly because of Mike. Okay, we got the nice little pocket square, that's a golfer. And in addition to that, we've got the socks from the $2,000 plus that I spent at the merchandise tent.
We appreciate the support.
This was the $40 that I spent on myself, and Teresa was the other $19.60, right, Teresa? One of the things that I've really grown to understand and appreciate from speaking with yourselves and also people that you work with is the importance of community relations. And that's what this last panel is about, is understanding the value of community relations. And Mike, I'll start with you, because quite frankly, I watch the PGA Tour, and you hear about the charitable works that are done at all these different tour stops. And I really didn't know that much about some of the backstory, especially the role that Ozzie Smith played in bringing the event. And of course, being there for most of the week, I saw a lot of events going on and bringing in kids. So talk about the connection between Bellerive, the PGA, and the St. Louis community.
Sure. When we went to the PGA to talk about getting events in St. Louis, the whole industry of golf was going through a fairly cathartic moment of there had been a continuing decline for probably a decade of participation in golf. And the perception, with some justification, is it's a middle-aged white guy sport. And those are not good demographics for growing the game in the future. So the PGA was going through this self-analysis with the help of some graduates of well-known MBA schools to figure out how to change the game. And clearly a big part of that is trying to find a way to make it more inclusive, to reach out to non-traditional participants, and to make an impact in the community to show that the game of golf is more than a bunch of 150-pound, 5'8" guys that can hit the ball 300 yards. So we went back to the PGA and said, look, you give us two events, and we're going to use that to really catalyze a change in our community that will go beyond the two events. And in fact, we coined the phrase Beyond 18, which had multiple meanings for us, because our initiative was we just looked at our community and said, what can we do to really make a meaningful difference in the lives of kids? And the best way to do that is to get kids to stay in school and graduate high school. If you look at any data on the life trajectory of kids who are high school graduates versus non-high school graduates, it's a really unbelievable difference in lifetime earnings and job prospects and other things. So that was our mission, and Ozzie had just coincidentally taken on a role with the Gateway chapter, which is the local PGA's union organization, in essence, of running their foundation as president. And so it was a really easy connection. Ozzie is passionate about St. Louis. He's passionate about kids. And it gave us a spark to catalyze that effort that we would have struggled to duplicate without Ozzie, quite frankly. But I understand in last night's broadcast, Ozzie even made some comments about a lot of other folks who were involved in doing that. He is the a great spokesperson, but there are a lot of people who are working really hard to make that difference in our community. I wish we could say we've done more. We've raised a lot of money. The money's all out in the community doing work. As I think most everybody knows, our needs in this community far exceed our generous philanthropic capacity.
Well, Dan, one of the things that I learned in interviewing you for the book project was we talked about something very simple that many teams can do, many organizations can do, but not all of them do, and that was bringing kids down on the field to sing God Bless America is just one of the many things that the Cardinals do. Talk about some of the things that the Cardinals do in reaching out to the community.
Well, I think Mike kind of touched on one point. We have our own community relations group. We have our own Cardinals Care charity, 501c3 organization. But we also have the ability to amplify other initiatives in this community's message and support a broad range of initiatives. We do it through, simple publicity and helping launch programs or campaigns or initiatives that are going on in the community. We use our broadcast partners, Fox Midwest and KMOX, to help get the messaging out about different programs that are going on. And then the specific programs that we conduct where we directly contribute to charities. Our Cardinals Care Foundation has given over $22 million in the last 20 years to different charities in the community. We've built 23 ballparks around the St. Louis region. We have 4,000 kids participating in our Redbird Rookies program. We go out to schools. But a lot of our things that you just mentioned, we bring people to the ballpark. And there's probably every charity in town has an event with us, as they probably do with you guys at the Blues too, where they will use our tickets and our event to advance their charity. And whether it's to fundraise a margin off the tickets or recruit people, get awareness for their messaging, whatever it might be, tickets and the ballpark experience really play nicely into that, helping in the community.
Sure. You heard Alex Rodrigo talk a few minutes ago from the Blues about a young man that worked for their team this summer, and that young man actually was a former student of mine at a prior university. And so I had a chance to hear a lot about what he was doing this summer, working with Alex and Chris Zimmerman and Steve as well. And one of the big projects was the Ice Center. Mm-hmm. And of course, a big part of that is tied to community relations. But I also know that you're very involved as an organization with youth hockey development. So talk a little bit about both of those angles, if you could.
Sure. Well, obviously hockey is a little bit different than almost any sport because on the one hand, you can walk out and play street hockey and ball hockey and things like that almost anywhere. But to truly play hockey, you need a sheet of ice. And so one of the things that I was amazed about when I moved to St. Louis was I grew up just south of Boston, Massachusetts, and Boston is hockey is very ingrained in that community, and a lot of rinks, a lot of programs. And I was actually very surprised when I got to St. Louis. The Blues the Blues and St. Louis have a very strong youth hockey program here in St. Louis. I was amazed by the level of skill. 3 years ago, 5 players from St. Louis went in the very first round of the NHL draft, which is amazing. So amazing, in fact, that we did some research, and even if you consider Toronto and Boston and everything, I don't think there's ever been one metropolitan city that had that many players taken in the first round of a draft. And a lot of that you could attribute to the former players here in St. Louis, the alumni that had been involved. But hey, ultimately we needed to do what we determined very quickly was that the Blues needed to do a better job of getting more involved with youth hockey, of celebrating the game at both. And the thing you got to remember, it's getting more kids interested in the sport, but it's also keeping them interested in the sport. And then, as I tell our guys all the time, and these guys well know, every little kid usually has a parent or two, and some grandparents and some uncles, and I've seen this myself in my own life where, people that had zero interest in hockey became interested in hockey because they saw their son, their daughter, their grandchild play, and their nephew, whatever it might be. So it's reaching out into the community and connecting your organization at the grassroots level. And so this rink that you're talking about, it's a project that we've worked long and hard on, and we've had some detours and some battles and a few different things, but it's going to be a great facility that's in Maryland Heights. It's a 3-sheet indoor.
We'll have to educate some of the WashU undergraduates where Maryland Heights is. I've learned in my 4 years at WashU that if it's not on the Loop and if it's not in Central West End, they are a little bit struggling to find where it is.
Well, I'd say this, if I were a student at WashU, I'm not sure I'd find myself in Maryland Heights.
That's right. Unless you're on the road team, right, and they go out to Creve Coeur Park
That's right.
and utilize that.
But it's going to be a great facility and a great project that's going to help. It's actually, and I'll brag on the Blues and our group a little bit. It's actually a gift to the city of St. Louis. It's a place for for our youth hockey to play. Obviously, the Blues will practice there, but I think the ice time that we're going to use is like 3% of the total ice time of the facility. So it's all about getting more kids on the ice, more opportunities to play. And giving a lot of these associations, there's 12 youth hockey associations around that are in the Missouri Youth Hockey Association, and it's giving them a great place to play.
That's great. I'm going to open it up a little bit broadly here. Mike, talking about event operations, what is some of the feedback that you're hearing from the PGA? I know they're busy with the Ryder Cup coming up in a few weeks, but at least from what I heard, I was inside in the media center, and the whispers that you hear from the people on the media side, CBS, the Golf Channel, everyone was so complimentary. What were you hearing from the PGA folks? Positive feedback, hopefully?
Yeah.
And I guess as a side question, what can we do to bring back, whether it's a BMW, whether it's a Ryder Cup? I know these things are planned out far in advance, so it's tough. But
So I'll start with CBS. I don't think there's anybody in here that does anything for a living that wouldn't mind a 20% year-over-year gain in whatever metric you use to measure success, and they had a 20% rating increase over the prior year for the PGA, and we went toe-to-toe with Masters coverage. So CBS and all the media that then trickled down from that, like Golf Channel and the other 900 reporters from around the world, were pretty excited because they had a great story to tell. And I would tell you, I'm eternally grateful that they told a great story, because you guys all know that a lot of the media will try and find that chink in the armor and wedge it open because everybody else is telling the good story. I want to tell the bad story. And we were really lucky that week that they really were so focused on the crowds, the logistics, the players. I mean, the leaderboard matters, The teams are great, but when they're winning, they're more great. And, you have a Tiger really contending, as well as a lot of other world-class athletes. It was really terrific. We surprised the golf world. They had very low expectations coming in about our ability to execute this. As a number of you may know, there were rumors up until the week of the event that the PGA was going to move it. I'm not sure where those came from, but there were a lot of them. So the expectations were low, and that's always a good thing. It makes it a little bit easier to exceed it. But the results were great. PGA has said, look forward to talking to you guys again. They're booked out to 2030. So the likelihood of us getting another PGA in my working lifetime is rather limited. But I think for St. Louis, if we can bring something back once a decade, I think that'll be pretty good.
Dan, earlier today we talked about the Budweiser Terrace, and we had some WashU students work with your team earlier this year and actually showed a photograph of you and your colleagues listening to them. Could you tell everybody a little bit about the Budweiser Terrace, what it is, and kind of what was the idea behind putting that into Busch Stadium, and how things are going?
Well, things are going very well with it. It was a project, I'm not sure how much info that you already gave out, but we basically took the upper two levels and 6 seating sections in the upper deck and right field, and tore out the seats and re-tiered the seating bowl to make it more three or four tiers of just standing platforms. We actually put lounge furniture on some of the platforms, plants. It was nothing really all that elaborate. But what we were capitalizing on is an area in the ballpark that had a really large concourse behind it. And it was actually a concourse that had some of the best views in our ballpark. We used to call it the Riverview Corner because it's the only place in the stadium you could see the river from. You have a great view of the arch. It's not a majestic part of the skyline, the south side of the city, but it's just a big open area, and the concourse behind it lent itself to some development. So by tearing out the seats, creating this standing room, social, it had the buzzword of the project was the Millennial Area Project, and it really didn't require a whole lot of infrastructure. It just was we were able to create this area. Budweiser loves that kind of engagement for their investment. If they're investing in a venue, they don't call their department sports marketing anymore. They call it experiential marketing, and that's what they want to do in venues, which is the same thing they've done over the winter or over the summer at the Enterprise Center. So that's basically it. It's just you take 1,000 seats out that were relatively low yield seats. We don't charge to go into the area. You don't need a ticket to go into the area. It's open to any of the fans. It's really not a millennial area per se. I mean, people are up there. I think in general, folks want to get out and socialize when they're at a sporting event. They don't want to sit in their seats for 3 straight hours, and that's what it's.
So 2 points on that note. So we weren't at the UMB, or we weren't at the Budweiser Terrace last night. The speakers and some others, we were at the UMB Club, and that includes seats, but guess what? We just stood there where you saw us last night with our drinks, lemonades, of course, and we were watching the game on the TVs, through the screens, and not at our seats, socializing with folks. Now, the other thing I want to tell you is you inadvertently helped one of our WashU students get an internship with the Atlanta Braves, and let me explain that to everybody, because it just helps to showcase this great relationship that we have with the Lakeup family. So you provided that opportunity for these students in February. It was a month later, and I got to give props to Louis Levy. Mark Socek was there as well. The two WashU, Mark was there as a staff member, but you were there as a fan of the WashU sports analytics team as they competed in Phoenix at the case competition. And sure enough, the WashU students won that event. And of course, there are scouts, if you will, from other organizations, and someone from the Atlanta Braves approached Isaiah, and sure enough, a few weeks later, he was given a summer internship with the Braves, which the Lakeup stipend helped to finance. So we really owe you a debt of gratitude, because that kind of put the ball in motion, so thank you.
Great news.
So all these impacts you just didn't know that you were having. You on his internships, Mike on all the money I spent at merchandise at the PGA. Chappie, all the things that are being done, especially this latest wave of renovations at Scottrade. Tell us, given your role of Chief Revenue Officer, how are you attempting or planning to monetize some of these new implementations? What are the things you need to do?
Well, a number of different ways. And it's funny that Dan mentioned that, because I keep hearing, these are millennial spaces, and that may be true, but they're everybody's spaces, right? I know this I love golf, and the first time I went to a tournament and was able to sit in a skybox and socialize with that event became 10 times better than any other time I went to. That's what people want to do. Look, you asked earlier, I was sitting listening, and you were asking about the impact on sports. Well, the biggest impact on sports is it brings people together. It allows people from different backgrounds, with different socioeconomic statuses, with different, beliefs, religious beliefs, you name it, to all root for one thing. And when you do that, you want to be together. You enjoy the atmosphere around it. You enjoy just the vibe, I guess, of it. So our purpose when we were renovating Enterprise Center was to create those opportunities for people to gather, those opportunities for people to mingle. When you talk about a revenue standpoint, I mean, certainly there's sponsorship standpoints, whether it's Budweiser or whether it's the Scott Credit Union Rinkside Club that we're doing, or whether it's the Jameson Clark Avenue Club, or whether it's different areas in the building that we have sponsorship opportunities. But you hope that all these places for people to mingle will certainly generate revenue from sales, from food and beverage sales and things like that. But I think all of that is generated by the belief that people want to congregate. They want to get together and cheer, and they want to get together and come together as a collective group to root for something. We have taken to in our efforts to get the building renovated and our efforts to help St. Louis move forward here, because candidly speaking, in many respects, St. Louis was getting left behind, and we have to change that. There's cities, Indianapolis, Louisville. Look at Nashville, what's going on in Nashville right now. I can tell you 25 years ago, I was the assistant general manager of a minor league team that would go into Nashville to play the Nashville Knights, and we would play in the Municipal Auditorium downtown. And it was so bad that I used to go for a run every time our players would have a pregame skate. And I was going out the door one day, and I asked the security guard, I said, which direction should I go? And he said, you need to turn your ass back around and run around the rink, because you don't need to be running it, right? Now go to Nashville and look what happens. So I will debate anybody, anytime, on what the impact of sports and stadiums and events, what Mike was just talking about earlier as well. St. Louis has taken a beating over the last few years. So, you're talking about, like, how does a rumor like that even start? Because, okay, we've had some issues, in the community that have happened. We've lost the St. Louis Rams. And you know what? I've only been here for 3 years, but what I love about St. Louis is this quiet belief that, you know what, we're better than that. And I think the support that the Cardinals get, the support, I wasn't shocked at all. I remember when Barry came down to meet with us, it was early on in the process of the PGA, and it was right after we had held the Winter Classic. And the Winter Classic at Busch Stadium, we did a great partnership with Dan and his team, and it was an unbelievable event for St. Louis. And shortly after that, Barry had come in to meet with us, and he was a little bit concerned about ticket sales. And I told Barry, you don't need to be. This place is going to respond. You just wait and see what St. Louis is going to do. So I wasn't shocked at all.
Yeah, Steve makes a really excellent point, just to kind of tie back to this community impact. When we give the community a positive experience to rally around, that's what we focus on. We don't focus on the differences. And that's what we saw the week of and week after the PGA Championship. We see that when your teams are winning and creating excitement in town, the focus of the dialogue in town turns positive. And when there's nothing else to talk about, we revert down to, we've got 93 municipalities in the county, and we got too many, we talk about all those things that aren't perfect, that need to get fixed, but they don't get fixed by continuing to harp on them. They get fixed by taking action to fix them. And I think it is a catalyzing opportunity that these guys do day in and day out that make a huge difference, as well as the outreach stuff. And that's a really great point, Steve.
I want to close out this panel by just, again, for those of you, especially the students that are not from this area, and even the parents that are here today, some parents of current students that are here, we appreciate your being here. I want to say a couple things, being that we're at a business school, about leadership and organization. All three of these individuals currently are with organizations that have shown leadership, structure, and organization. And from my experience, especially after writing this book and all the people that I talked to in the process of putting it together, it is unquestionably the cream rises to the top. If you have structure, if you have organization, you're more likely to see success. What Mike did with his leadership, along with Barry, as you mentioned, who was with the PGA, kind of the director of championships, and all the people behind the scenes there, put on a wonderful event. We talk about the St. Louis Sports Commission. Some of those folks were here earlier today, all the events that they put on here. Dan, you look at what the Cardinals have done under the new leadership, or the new leadership since the mid-'90s, and what a turnaround that you've seen with the franchise there. And I've lived here now long enough. I guess I have to call myself a St. Louis, and I'm in my 20th year. But obviously, when Tom Stillman came aboard with the Blues and with Chris Zimmerman, those folks, it really has changed the dynamic on the business side of that organization. So for everything all three of you have done and continue doing for the welfare of this community, we thank you. So before we conclude our program today, I just wanted to we're not actually quite done yet, because we do have a couple of our guests today that are going to go out in some breakout rooms. I think Jill Bodensteiner is in room 150 at 3 p.m., and she's going to talk about college athletics administration. So if anybody would like to follow her over to 150, we're going to do that. I think, Mike, if you've got a few minutes, we're going to have a little session with Mike and event organization at 3:30. So again, thank you very much. Feel free to grab some Ted Drews, but we're pretty much done in here for the day. So thank you. Thanks, Chapman.